Eleanor is 74 years old. She'd been dealing with constant throat mucus for almost 4 years. She'd watched every video in this series. She'd elevated her bed. She'd cut out coffee after noon. She'd changed her evening eating habits. She'd started using a humidifier. All of it helped, somewhat. But every single morning, the mucus was still there, still thick, still requiring 10 minutes of clearing before she felt functional. At a follow-up appointment, her doctor suggested she try one specific thing she hadn't tried yet. It took 30 seconds to set up, it cost nothing, and it felt slightly odd for the first 2 nights. By night 5, Eleanor noticed something different about her mornings. Not dramatic, not overnight, but genuinely different. By the end of the second week, she described her mornings as the clearest they had been in 4 years. Today, I'm going to tell you exactly what Eleanor tried and why it works the way it does. Quick but important. Everything here is educational only, not medical advice. If you have persistent throat symptoms that haven't responded to self-care, see your doctor. Drop clear in the comments for a free guide. Everything we cover today plus the complete step-by-step setup instructions. Before I tell you what Eleanor's doctor recommended, I want to explain why it works. Because understanding the mechanism is what makes the difference between trying something once and actually committing to it long enough to see results. Everything in this series has pointed to the same fundamental truth about chronic throat mucus after 70. The problem is not primarily a daytime problem, it is an overnight problem. The mucus that bothers people most, the thick accumulation that's worst in that first 15 minutes after waking, is produced during sleep. Not left over from the day before, produced fresh during the night in response to specific conditions that exist in the throat during those sleeping hours. We've covered the 2 biggest overnight drivers in previous videos: acid migration from the stomach reaching the throat during sleep, and nasal passage drying from low humidity air leading to compensatory mucus overproduction. Both of those drivers share one common amplifying factor. One condition that makes both of them significantly worse, that multiplies the acid exposure, multiplies the drying effect, and adds a third mechanism of throat irritation on top of both of them. That condition is mouth breathing during sleep, and the one simple change Eleanor's doctor recommended was this: mouth taping. What mouth taping is and what it isn't. Before anything else, I want to address the reaction that most people have when they hear those 2 words for the first time. It sounds extreme. It sounds uncomfortable. It sounds like something that couldn't possibly be safe. None of those reactions are unreasonable, and none of them are accurate once you understand what mouth taping actually involves in practice. Mouth taping for sleep is the practice of placing a small piece of specially designed, skin-safe tape, or in some cases a simple piece of surgical paper tape, lightly across the lips before sleep. Not sealed tight, not preventing opening, simply providing a gentle physical cue that encourages the lips to remain closed during sleep rather than falling open. The tape used for this purpose is not duct tape, not packing tape, not any adhesive designed for anything other than skin contact. It is either purpose-made mouth tape, available widely online and in pharmacies, or standard surgical paper tape of the kind used to secure medical dressings. Both peel away easily with any movement of the mouth. They cannot prevent you from opening your mouth if you need to. They are not a restraint. They are a gentle reminder. The practice has been used in clinical sleep research for decades. It has been evaluated in the context of snoring reduction, sleep apnea management, and oral health. And in the last several years, it has received growing attention in the context of exactly the problem we're discussing: chronic throat mucus, nighttime airway drying, and morning throat symptoms in older adults. Why mouth breathing during sleep is the hidden amplifier of throat mucus. To understand why closing the mouth during sleep produces such a significant change in throat mucus, you need to understand what happens to the throat when air bypasses the nose and enters directly through the mouth. The nose is one of the most sophisticated air processing systems in the human body. Every breath taken through the nose passes through a chamber lined with mucous membranes, blood vessels, and turbinate structures that do 3 things simultaneously. They warm the incoming air to approximately body temperature. They humidify it, adding moisture until the air is nearly saturated before it reaches the throat, and they filter it, trapping particles, bacteria, allergens, and irritants in the mucus layer before they can reach the lower airway. When you breathe through your mouth, all three of those processes are completely bypassed. Air enters cold, dry, and unfiltered. It contacts the throat lining directly, repeatedly, with every breath for 6 to 8 hours. For the throat, this produces 3 simultaneous effects that are each independently significant for mucus production. Effect 1. Direct drying of the throat lining. The mucous membrane lining the throat requires continuous moisture to maintain its normal function and to keep its mucus layer fluid enough to drain efficiently. Cold, dry, mouth-breathed air draws moisture from that membrane with every breath. Over 6 to 8 hours, the surface of the throat becomes progressively drier. The body compensates by producing thicker, more viscous mucus, which doesn't drain as efficiently as normal mucus and accumulates in exactly the way that produces the morning mucus burden. Effect 2. Amplification of acid damage. For people with any degree of laryngopharyngeal reflux, which we covered in detail in the previous video in this series, mouth breathing during sleep significantly amplifies the damage that acid causes to the throat tissue. Acid that reaches the throat causes tissue irritation. That irritated tissue then gets bathed in cold, dry, unfiltered air for hours. The combination of chemical irritation from acid and desiccation from mouth-breathed air produces a level of tissue response that is far greater than either factor alone, and the mucus production that follows is correspondingly more significant. Effect 3. Direct particle and irritant contact. Whatever is in the air of the bedroom, dust, pet dander, mold spores, volatile compounds from cleaning products or air fresheners, enters the throat unfiltered when mouth breathing is occurring. The nasal filtering system that would normally intercept these particles is completely bypassed. The throat receives the full particle load of the bedroom air directly, triggering an immune and mucus response that it wouldn't produce if that same air had passed through the nose first. All three of these effects operate independently. All three are present simultaneously in anyone who mouth breathes during sleep, and all three are directly and completely addressed by switching to nasal breathing, which is exactly what gentle mouth taping facilitates. Why older adults are disproportionately mouth breathers during sleep. Most people don't choose to mouth breathe during sleep. It happens unconsciously. The mouth falls open as the muscles of the face and jaw relax during deeper sleep stages. And there are specific reasons why this happens more frequently and more severely after 70 than at any earlier age. The first is reduced nasal airway patency. The nasal passages narrow slightly with age due to structural changes in cartilage and the nasal lining. This increased nasal resistance makes nose breathing during sleep mildly more effortful, and when sleep deepens and muscle tone decreases, the path of least resistance shifts toward the mouth. The second is reduced muscle tone throughout the upper airway. The muscles that maintain the position of the jaw and lips during sleep have the same age-related reduction in tone that affects muscles throughout the body. In a younger person, these muscles maintain lip closure even during sleep without conscious effort. In an older person, that unconscious maintenance becomes less reliable, and the mouth gradually falls open during the night. The third is the common use of medications that reduce muscle tone as a side effect. Certain sleep aids, muscle relaxants, and antihistamines, several of which we discussed in a previous video in this series, reduce muscle tone throughout the body, including in the upper airway. A person taking one of these medications is significantly more likely to experience mouth opening during sleep than a person who isn't. The fourth is nasal congestion, from the very conditions that drive throat mucus. Postnasal drip and nasal inflammation, themselves common causes of throat mucus, can partially obstruct the nasal passages enough to make nasal breathing during sleep uncomfortable. The body then defaults to mouth breathing, which worsens the throat mucus problem that caused the nasal congestion in the first place. This last point is worth sitting with. For many people with chronic throat mucus after 70, mouth breathing is both a consequence of the condition and a driver of it, creating a self-perpetuating cycle that continues regardless of what other interventions are tried. Breaking that cycle is what mouth taping accomplishes. The research behind nasal breathing and throat health. The evidence base for nasal breathing and its effects on airway health is well established. A 2015 study published in the journal Chest found that nasal breathing during sleep significantly reduced upper airway resistance and improved oxygen saturation in older adults compared to mouth breathing, even in the absence of diagnosed sleep apnea. Reduced upper airway resistance means less turbulence, less tissue vibration, and less mechanical irritation of the throat during sleep. Research published in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health documented that nasal breathing during sleep produced measurably lower levels of inflammatory markers in the upper airway compared to mouth breathing, directly relevant to the mucus-producing inflammatory response that chronic throat mucus represents. And clinical observations in laryngology and otolaryngology practice have consistently identified mouth breathing during sleep as one of the most common modifiable contributors to chronic throat and laryngeal symptoms in older adults, including the specific symptom cluster of morning mucus, morning hoarseness, and globus sensation that we've discussed throughout this series. The connection between nasal breathing, reduced throat irritation, and reduced mucus production is mechanistically clear and clinically consistent. The question is not whether it works. The question is whether the person with chronic throat mucus knows about it and has tried it. Most don't. Most haven't. How to actually do it. The complete protocol. The how matters as much as the what, because mouth taping done incorrectly or with the wrong materials produces discomfort that causes people to abandon it before the benefit arrives. Step 1. Choose the right tape. Two options work well: purpose-made mouth tape. Brands like Somnifix, Hostage Tape, or similar products are designed specifically for sleep use, are gentle on skin, and have a small central breathing vent that provides additional safety. These are available on Amazon and in many pharmacies for a few cents per night. The alternative is standard surgical paper tape, the kind sold in the first aid section of any drugstore. 1 inch wide, cut a piece approximately 2 to 3 inches long. This option is equally effective, significantly less expensive, and the tape used in most clinical research on this topic. Do not use medical cloth tape, athletic tape, silicone tape, or any tape not specifically designed for skin contact. Those adhesives are too strong, can cause skin irritation, and remove too abruptly. Step 2. Prepare the skin. Before applying the tape, make sure your lips and the surrounding skin are completely dry. Moisturizer, lip balm, and oils reduce adhesion significantly and cause the tape to fall off during the night, which defeats the purpose. If your lips tend to be dry and you normally use lip balm at night, apply it only to the inner portion of the lips, rather than the outer edges where the tape will contact skin. Step 3. Apply the tape correctly. Place the tape horizontally across the center of the closed lips, not pressed tight, but resting lightly across. The lips should feel held together gently, not sealed. A small vertical piece of tape works better than a horizontal one for some people. Placed along the center of the lips vertically rather than across them horizontally. Experiment with both in the first week to find what's more comfortable. The tape should not feel like a restraint. If it feels uncomfortable, the adhesion is too strong, try a lighter pressure application or switch to the surgical paper tape option. Step 4. Manage the adjustment period. The first 2 to 3 nights feel unfamiliar. Most people find themselves peeling the tape off sometime during the night without fully waking. That's normal. Simply reapply it when you notice it's come off, or if you wake during the night, check and reapply. By night 4 or 5, most people report that the tape is still in place when they wake. The adjustment period is typically about 1 week. The improvement in morning throat symptoms typically begins during that same first week, often noticed around night 5 to 7, exactly as Eleanor experienced. Step 5. What to expect in the first 2 weeks. Week 1. Adjustment. The tape comes off occasionally. Some nights are better than others. But mornings begin to show a subtle difference. Slightly less thick mucus, slightly less need for extensive clearing, slightly clearer voice earlier in the morning. Week 2. Consolidation. The tape stays on consistently. The morning difference becomes more pronounced. For most people, the peak improvement arrives somewhere in the 10 to 14 day window, which is why committing to a full 2 weeks before evaluating results is important. One important safety note. Mouth taping is not appropriate for everyone. If you have significant nasal obstruction that prevents comfortable nasal breathing while awake, address the nasal obstruction first before attempting mouth taping during sleep. If you experience significant anxiety about any restriction around the mouth, this practice is not appropriate for you. And if you have moderate to severe sleep apnea that is not currently treated, discuss this practice with your sleep physician before trying it. The relationship between mouth taping and sleep apnea management requires individualized medical guidance. For everyone else, healthy older adults with chronic morning throat mucus and no significant nasal obstruction, the risk profile of correctly applied mouth taping is minimal and the potential benefit is substantial, combining mouth taping with everything else in the series. For people who have already implemented the interventions from previous videos in this series, bed elevation, left side sleeping, the pre-bed saline rinse, the bedroom humidifier, the evening eating window, mouth taping is the final piece that addresses the one remaining overnight mechanism those interventions don't fully cover. Bed elevation and left side sleeping address acid migration. The humidifier addresses ambient air dryness. The saline rinse clears the nasal passages before sleep. The eating window reduces the gastric load available for reflux. Mouth taping ensures that whatever improvements those interventions produce in the overnight environment, reduced acid, better humidified air, clearer nasal passages, are actually delivered to the throat through the nose rather than bypassed entirely through the mouth. It is the intervention that makes all the other interventions work better, which is why Eleanor, who had already done everything else, noticed such a pronounced improvement when she added this one change. Not because the other changes hadn't mattered, because this change finally ensured that her throat was receiving the benefit of those changes during the hours that mattered most. 4 years of consistent, frustrating throat mucus, addressed meaningfully in 2 weeks, by 30 seconds of preparation before sleep. That's Eleanor's experience. It's not universal, nothing in medicine is universal, but it's common enough and the mechanism is clear enough and the cost is low enough that if you've been dealing with chronic morning throat mucus and you haven't tried this, tonight is the right time to start. Drop clear in the comments for the free guide. And if someone you know has been fighting this battle for years and has tried everything except this one thing, share this with them. Because sometimes the piece that changes everything is the simplest one, and the one nobody thought to mention. See you in the next one.